welcome to Today in the News on Vanguard Live. I am Precious Chukudi. We begin with the front pages of the papers this morning, starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with CBN sacks boards management of Union, Keystone, Polaris Banks. The writer says accuses them of banks and other Financial Institution Act infractions. A special investigator asks federal government to take over banks. And on page 5, economic reforms, NECA analysts expect align with World Bank on ease of inflation. Stories above, we have alleged $6 billion fraud. Ex-Prime Minister Agunloye docked, remanded in prison. Soyinka raises alarm. Tax waivers on imported mining equipment, orders underway, and that's coming from federal government. Betta Edu, greatest casualties of 2022 electoral fraud, and that's coming from Labour Party. Zenith Jais Bank MD is not arrested by EFCC. And on page 9, suspension. Perm Sec takes over humanitarian ministry from Betta Edu. And that's how we can take on the front pages of Vanguard. We'll take a look at the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with anxiety as CBN sacks boards of Union, Keystone, Polaris Banks. And on page 3, Supreme Court returns Fitiri as Adamawa governor, reserves the judgment in Abia appeal. Austerity between call for sacrifice and leading by example. That's a news analyst on page 4. A third Milan bridge closure. Commuters lament chaotic traffic, seek reprieve. Calls for expanded probe intensify as Perm Sec takes charge from Edu. Federal government disbursed 10 billion naira to 165 private accounts in 2022. Exit of multinationals, death knell for local industry. Governors abdicate duties to debt fund eternal lament. Court remands ex-minister Agunloye in Kuje Center. That's how we can take on the front pages of the Guardian newspaper. Take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with CBN sacks Union, Polaris, Keystone Banks board. The writer says Modibo order 25 bank chairmen, MDs, directors asked to resign. Interim boards likely today. CBN warns against panic withdrawals. Marketers to meet Dangote over fuel supply. COVID-19 not over. 10,000 deaths recorded December, and that's coming from WHO. NGX records 638 billion naira loss first in new year. Sex for Mark, suspended UNICAL Don still in prison after 215 million naira bail. Someone who hails $1 1 billion naira security donation. Stories above. Obasanjo ex-minister Agunloye arraigned for $6 billion Mambila contract. Naira plunges to 1,082 naira to dollar after CBN $2 billion repayments. And lastly, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, Edu, EFCC quizzes top ministry officials, ICPC recovers 50 billion naira. And that's how we can take on the front pages of the papers this morning. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. If you're just joining me, still today in the news on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chukudi. We'll look at some of the stories on the front pages of the papers this morning, and we're looking at CBN sacks board management of Union, Keystone, Polaris Bank. And the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has dissolved the board and management of Union Bank, Keystone Bank, and Polaris Bank. According to a statement by the CBN Acting Director of Corporate Communications, Mrs. Hakama Sidi Ali, this action became necessary due to the non-compliance of these banks and their respective boards with the provision of Section 12C FGH of Banks and Other Financial Institution Act 2020. She says, the bank's infraction vary from regulatory non-compliance, corporate governance failure, disregarding the conditions under which their licenses were granted, and involvement in activities that pose a threat to financial stability, among others. The CBN assures the public of the safety and security of depositors' funds and remains resolute in fulfilling its mandate to uphold a safe, sound and robust financial system in Nigeria. Our banking system remains strong and resilient. It will be recalled that the decision to dissolve after a meeting between the CBN governor, Yemi Cardoso, the special investigator appointed by President Bola Tinubu on the CBN, Jim Obaze, and the boards of the three banks, including Titan Trust Bank investors who had earlier avoided meeting with the special investigator. The media had reported in December 2023 that the Office of the Special Investigator has insisted that the chairman of Titan Trust Bank (TTB), Mr. Tunde Lemo, Mr. Cornelius Vink, and Rahul Savara appeared before it over the acquisition of Union Bank of Nigeria. The special investigator who had summoned Lemo, who is also a former deputy governor of the CBN, rejected Lemo's request for an extension of time for shareholders to prove their ownership of Titan Trust Bank. It insisted that Lemo and others summoned in December 24 letter must appear to prove that their acquisition of Union Bank followed due process, warning that they risk losing the financial institutions of the Nigerian government. It was reported that the special CBN investigator, in a letter dated December 24, 2023, signed by the heads of operation, Office of the Special Investigator, DCP Eloho Opoziakpo, directed Lemo to report at the Department of Force Intelligence opposite the Force Headquarters, Shehu Shagari Way, Abuja, on Thursday, December 28, 2023. According to the letter, Babatunde, who was expected to be questioned over the UBN acquisition, was instructed to come along with the promoters of Titan Trust Bank, Mr. Vinks and Mr. Savara, to meet with the team of special investigators. The letter directed all the summoned persons to come along with all the documents, information requested from them by the letter to Mr. Cornelius Banks, dated 28 August 2023, attached here with an Appendix 1. You will also be required to make additional statements to your earlier statement on that day. The special investigator said it reached the conclusion following the failures of the purported shareholders to appear before its panel with the necessary document to prove that they genuinely acquired the banks, and recommended that the Nigerian government should take over the bank from the purported owner. The Lemo had, in a widely circulated statement, rejected the assertion by the special investigator and asked the special investigator to give the shareholders 7 days to prove their ownership of Titan Trust Bank and Union Bank of Nigeria with necessary documents, failure of which the two entities should be forfeited to the federal government. However, Titan Bank was not among the banks which boards and management were sacked yesterday by the Apex Bank. The report recommended that the federal government reverse sales of the banks and take them over, saying that they were acquired through proxies without evidence of payment. We move over to our next story, and our next story is on economic reforms. NECA analyst expert aligns with the World Bank on ease of inflation. The Nigeria Employers Consultative Association (NECA) financial and economic analyst and expert aligned with the World Bank's projection that the nation's inflation rate would ease in 2024 if effects of last year's foreign exchange FX market and petrol subsidy reform continue to fade. Recall that in 2023, Central Bank of Nigeria (CBN) announced a change in the operations of the FX market by collapsing all the exchange windows into the investors and exporters I and E window. The market had continued to record high levels of fluctuation since the reform, worsening Nigeria's inflation, which currently stands at 28.2%. Another major reform implemented by the federal government was the removal of petrol subsidy. Meanwhile, the World Bank has stated that Nigeria's inflation should ease in 2024 as the effect of last year's foreign exchange FX market and petrol subsidy reform would continue to fade. The Global Bank made the projection in its Global Economic Prospect Report for January 2024. Commenting on its outlook for the country's economy, the World Bank said the structural reform would boost fiscal revenue over the period in Nigeria, that the country's per capita income would return to its pre-pandemic level by 2025. Per capita income (PCI) or total income measures the average income earned per person in a given area, city, region, country in the specified year. The report stated, and I quote, "Growth in Nigeria is projected at 3.3% this year and 3.3% in 2025, up 0.3 and 0.6 percentage points respectively since June as macro-fiscal reforms gradually bear fruit. Baseline forecast implies that the per capita income will reach its pre-pandemic level only in 2025. Growth is expected to be driven mainly by agriculture, construction, services, and trade. Inflation should gradually ease as the effects of the last year's exchange rate reforms and removal of fuel subsidies fade. These structural reforms are expected to boost fiscal revenue over the forecast period." Reacting to the World Bank's report, the Director General of Nigeria's Employers Consultative Association (NECA), Adewale Smart Oyewunde, said, We noted the World Bank's projection and affirmed that it is consistent with our earlier projection that from the end of Q2 2024, significant improvement in most economic indices should be expected, especially if the government stays the course in its current economic reforms and continues with its strategic engagement with organized business. We take a look at our next story, and our next story is on suspension. Perm Secretary Eniton takes over from Betta Edu. Following the suspension of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Betta Edu, the ministry's permanent secretary Abel Olumuyiwa Eniton has assumed responsibility of the ministry. His action is in line with the directive of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who had on Monday suspended Edu over alleged payment of public funds into private accounts. Eniton assumed responsibility after a letter to that effect from the office of the Secretary of the Government of the Federation (OSGF) was given to him Monday night. Recall that the president, through his special advisor Media and Publicity Ajuri Ngilale, had directed the suspended minister to hand over to the permanent secretary of the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, and she is further directed by the president to fully cooperate with investigating authorities as they conduct their investigation. Furthermore, the president has tasked the panel that's headed by the coordinating minister of the economy and minister of finance to, among other functions, conduct a comprehensive diagnosis on the financial architecture and framework of the social investment programs, with a view to conclusively reforming the relevant institutions and programs in the determined bid to eliminate all institutional frailties for the exclusive benefit of disadvantaged households and win back lost public confidence in the initiative. Alright, we'll take a look at Mr. and Mrs. before we go. And this morning, Mrs. is speaking. She says, you have settled the children's school fees and other bills in this tough month of January. How did you do it? And Mr. replies, I simply avoided all the extravagant Christmas and New Year party traps you set. Mr. Well, of course, we know that parents are at this point in time, paying for fees for their wards and children to return back to school. We hope that the year will be good to all our parents. All right, that's all we can take on the front pages of the papers this morning as well. Remember that you can equally like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms showing on your screen. Find out up-to-date stories. Go to our website at www.vanguardindia.com to find out more. I am Precious Chukudi, and thank you for watching.